There was never any warning before Vivian's world crumbled in 11 minutes. She walked out of Chicago's most prestigious hospital, her hands trembling as she clutched her cancer diagnosis, believing her husband, Alessandro De Luca, the most powerful mafia boss in North America, would be her only anchor amidst this storm. But in the dark parking garage, the man who had sworn eternal love coldly threw the word divorce in her face. Illness to him was an unforgivable weakness. Follow the story to the end, and leave a comment letting me know which city you're watching from. The fluorescent lights in the oncology wing hummed at a frequency that made Vivian Ashcroft's teeth ache. She'd been staring at them for the better part of 40 minutes, lying flat on a table that smelled like rubbing alcohol in fear, while a machine the size of a small car photographed the inside of her body in cold, indifferent slices. Dr. Patricia Nguyen had a kind face. That was the first thing Vivian noticed when the radiologist sat down across from her, manila folder in hand, knuckles slightly too tight around the edges. Kind faces delivering bad news were the worst kind. You couldn't even hate them properly. "Mrs. DeLuca, I want you to take a breath before I say anything." Vivian didn't breathe. She felt her spine lock straight, felt the air in the room go thick and wrong, the way it did right before a car crash, that half second of knowing. The biopsy confirmed what we suspected. It's breast cancer, stage 2, based on the imaging. We caught it relatively early, which is good news, but I won't sugarcoat this conversation for you. You're looking at surgery, likely a mastectomy, followed by chemotherapy. This is going to be a fight. 11 minutes. That was how long it took from the moment Dr. Nguyen said the word cancer to the moment Vivian was standing on the curb outside Northwestern Memorial, autumn wind cutting through her wool coat, a folder of pamphlets and lab results clutched against her chest like a shield that wouldn't hold. She'd counted. She didn't know why she'd counted, except that her brain needed something to hold on to besides the word stage 2, besides mastectomy, besides the sudden, vertiginous understanding that her body, the body she'd lived in for 34 years without much thought, had turned against her without permission. Marco was waiting by the black Escalade, arms crossed, sunglasses on despite the gray October sky. Marco had been Alessandro's driver for 6 years and had never once looked Vivian directly in the eye, not since the wedding, not since she'd become Mrs. DeLuca instead of just Vivian Ashcroft, daughter of a Chicago surgeon, the girl who used to volunteer at the free clinic on Saturdays before her life got swallowed by money and marble floors and men who didn't ask permission to do anything. "He's downstairs," Marco said. "Parking garage. Said to bring you down." Her stomach did something complicated. Relief, mostly. Alessandro never came to appointments. Too busy, too exposed. A man like him couldn't sit in a waiting room without someone clocking his face and starting to ask questions. But he'd promised, after the biopsy results came back ambiguous enough to warrant a follow-up scan, that he'd be there, that he'd meet her after, that whatever it was, they'd handle it together. She believed him. God help her. Even after everything she'd learned about the man underneath the tailored suits, she still believed him when he used that word. Together. The parking garage beneath the medical building was the kind of concrete cavern that ate sound, swallowed it whole, left only the echo of her own heels against the floor and the distant hiss of a car alarm 2 levels down. Alessandro's convoy took up 4 spots near the elevator bank. The Escalade, 2 black sedans flanking it, his men standing in loose formation with the particular stillness of people paid to notice everything and react to nothing. Alessandro himself stood apart from them, near the rear of his own car, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and clipped in the rapid Italian he used when he didn't want anyone, including her, to follow the conversation. He saw her coming. He didn't smile. Vivian had learned to read her husband the way sailors read weather, the small shifts in his jaw, the way his shoulders carried tension differently depending on whether the threat was business or personal. What she saw now was neither. It was worse. It was the careful blankness of a man who had already made a decision and was simply waiting for the right moment to deliver it. He ended the call without saying goodbye. "Well?" His voice was flat. Not cruel, not yet, just flat, like a man asking about the weather. "It's cancer." She said it fast before she could lose her nerve, before the words could curdle in her throat. "Stage 2. They want to do surgery, a mastectomy, then chemo." She watched his face for something, anything, softening around the eyes, a hand reaching for hers, even just the muscles in his jaw relaxing in acknowledgement of what she'd just handed him. Instead, she watched him go very, very still. "How long?" he said. Not a question, really, more a demand. "How long have you known and not told me?" "I just found out, Alessandro, 10 minutes ago. I came straight—" "No." He cut her off, and now something was moving behind his eyes, something cold and calculating that she recognized from boardrooms, from the rare occasions she'd witnessed him negotiate with men whose lives depended on the outcome. "The biopsy was 2 weeks ago. You knew it might be this. You knew, and you let me—" "Let you what?" Her voice cracked, the first real crack in 11 minutes of holding herself together by sheer will. "Let you live your life? I didn't want to scare you over a maybe. I wanted to wait until I knew something real, and now I know, and I'm telling you, right now, exactly like I said I would." A muscle ticked in his jaw. Behind him, his men had gone unnaturally still, the kind of stillness that meant they were listening even while pretending not to, calibrating how much of this moment to remember and how much to forget. "Sit in the car," Alessandro said. "What?" "The car, Vivian. We're not doing this here." She got in. Of course she got in. 6 years of marriage had taught her when his voice dropped into that particular register. Arguing only made things worse, made him colder, made the eventual conversation longer and more brutal than it needed to be. She slid into the back seat of the Escalade, folder still clutched against her chest, and waited while he circled around and got in beside her, leaving a 1.5 feet of leather seat between them that felt, suddenly, like the widest gap she'd ever seen. The door shut. The world went quiet, soundproofed. Just the two of them, and the smell of his cologne, and the leather and something underneath it all that smelled like an ending. "I want a divorce," Alessandro said. The words didn't land right away. Her brain simply refused them, the way a body sometimes refuses a wound, registers the cut a full second before the pain arrives. She actually laughed, a short, ugly bark of disbelief. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me. I just told you I have cancer, Alessandro. I just walked out of that hospital with—" She shook the folder at him, papers sliding loose. "With a treatment plan, with a surgery date they're trying to schedule for next week, and you're telling me you want a divorce? Now? You're doing this now?" "I'm doing this now because now is when it's true." His voice stayed level, terrifyingly level, the voice he used when he'd already wargamed every possible reaction and built his responses accordingly. "I didn't marry you to watch you get sick, Vivian. I didn't sign up to sit in hospital rooms and watch you lose your hair and throw up and waste away while I'm supposed to run an empire that doesn't pause for anyone's chemotherapy schedule." "You didn't sign up." She repeated the words slowly, like she was tasting poison and trying to identify the source. "We took vows, Alessandro. In sickness and in health, in case you don't remember. You were standing right next to me when I said it. Vows are for normal people." Now something flickered across his face, something almost like apology, almost like he understood how monstrous he sounded and simply didn't care enough to stop. "I run an organization that depends on perception. Strength. Do you understand what it does to me, to my position? If word gets out that my wife is sick, that she's weak, that I'm tied to someone who's fighting cancer." Her voice had gone very quiet now, quiet in the way that usually preceded her worst anger, though right now it felt more like shock holding her vocal cords in a vice. "You're worried about your image. I have a tumor in my breast and you're worried about your image." "I'm worried about everything, Vivian. That's my job. That's what I do. I worry about the things that could destroy what I've built. And a sick wife is exactly the kind of liability that— Liability." She said the word back to him like it had teeth. "That's what I am to you. A liability." He didn't answer. That was its own answer, the silence stretching out between them while the parking garage's fluorescent hum bled faintly through the soundproofed glass. "I refuse," he said finally, and his voice had gone almost gentle now, which was somehow worse than the coldness, "to spend the next year watching you fade away. I've seen what cancer does to people, Vivian. I watched my own mother go through it. I'm not doing that again. I won't." So instead you're abandoning me before I even start treatment. Her hands had started shaking, the folder trembling against her chest. That's your solution. Cut and run before things get hard. I'm being honest with you. Isn't that better than pretending? Than staying out of guilt and resenting you for it? Watching us both rot from the inside while I pretend I can handle something I know I can't? For a moment, just a moment, she almost respected the brutal honesty of it, the way you might respect a blade for being sharp even as it opened your skin. Almost. Get out, she said. Vivian, get out of the car, Alessandro. I'll have Marco take me home. Stay away from me. He looked at her for a long moment, something working behind his eyes that she couldn't name. Calculation, maybe, or the faintest ember of something like regret, quickly extinguished. And then he opened the door and stepped out into the gray light of the parking garage without another word. She watched through the tinted window as he walked back to his men, said something low she couldn't hear, and one of the sedans peeled away first, followed by the Escalade's twin, the whole convoy dissolving into the city's gray afternoon like smoke. Marco lingered by the driver's door, clearly unsure whether his job was still to drive her, or whether the universe had just shifted beneath his feet too. Mrs. DeLuca, he said carefully, sliding into the driver's seat. Where to? She opened her mouth to say home, and then realized she had no idea, anymore, what that word meant. The mansion in Lincoln Park was Alessandro's house, bought before they married, every room decorated by an interior designer Alessandro had hired and approved without consulting her. Was that still home? Was anything? My sister's, she said instead. Helena's office. Take me there. The drive through Chicago traffic took 23 minutes, and Vivian spent every one of them staring out the window at a city that suddenly looked unfamiliar, like she was seeing it through someone else's eyes. Someone whose entire life hadn't just been demolished in a hospital parking garage. She thought about screaming. She thought about crying. She did neither, because some animal part of her brain understood that if she started, she might not stop, and she needed to be functional, needed to be a person who could walk into her sister's law office and explain what had just happened without falling apart in the lobby. Helena Ashcroft's office occupied the entire 42nd floor of a building on LaSalle Street, glass walls, and a view of the river that clients paid extra for, psychologically, even if they never admitted it. Helena herself had built a reputation over 15 years as the kind of attorney who didn't lose, who specialized in financial disputes so Byzantine that other lawyers sent her their hardest cases out of professional cowardice. She was on the phone when Vivian walked in, but one look at her sister's face, gray, hollowed out, eyes red-rimmed but dry, and Helena ended the call mid-sentence. Viv, what happened? I have cancer. The words came out flatter this time, worn smooth by repetition. And Alessandro wants a divorce. Helena's expression did something complicated, grief and fury arriving almost simultaneously, fighting for dominance on her face. She came around the desk and pulled Vivian into a hug that smelled like her perfume from college, something with bergamot in it. A smell that had meant safety for 30 years. Sit down, Helena said. Tell me everything. From the beginning. Vivian told her. The biopsy, the scan, the 11 minutes, the parking garage, the word liability landing like a slap. By the time she finished, Helena's jaw had gone tight in a way Vivian recognized from childhood. The exact expression their father used to get before he delivered devastating cross-examinations and mock trials at the dinner table. He said that, liability, to your face, while you were holding your diagnosis. Word for word. That son of a bitch. Helena's voice had dropped into a register Vivian associated with courtrooms, with depositions, with the particular violence of legal precision. Okay. Listen to me, Viv. I need you to hear what I'm about to say, and I need you to actually absorb it, not just nod along because you're in shock. Can you do that? Vivian nodded, though she suspected she was, in fact, exactly the kind of nodding along in shock that Helena was worried about. You're not going to survive this fight by being gracious. You're not going to survive it by giving him the benefit of the doubt, by hoping he'll come around, by being the bigger person. Men like Alessandro de Luca only respect one thing, and it isn't love, and it sure as hell isn't loyalty.
It's leverage. So we're going to find yours. Helena, I don't have leverage. I have a tumor and a marriage that just ended in a parking garage. You have me, Helena said, and you have Evelyn, and you have a family that has survived worse than one cowardly mafia boss with a god complex. Speaking of which, she was already reaching for her phone. Evelyn needs to be your surgeon. No one else touches you. I don't care what insurance says. I don't care what hospital politics say. Our sister is one of the best breast surgeons in this country, and she is going to be the one who operates on you. The mention of their other sister cracked something loose in Vivian's chest, the first real tears arriving now that she'd run out of adrenaline to hold them back. Evelyn Ashcroft had spent the last decade building a surgical practice specializing in exactly this kind of cancer, had given a TED Talk on it, had been featured in medical journals for pioneering a less invasive technique that improved recovery times. If anyone could get her through the physical part of this nightmare, it was Evelyn. Call her, Vivian managed. Please. Helena was already dialing. What followed was the strange, surreal experience of watching her sisters mobilize around her like a small, fierce army. Helena coordinating with Evelyn's office to expedite a consultation, both of them talking over each other on speakerphone about second opinions and surgical timelines, and whether the original hospital's treatment plan was even the right one, while Vivian sat curled in a leather chair by the window, watching the river move slowly toward the lake, feeling, for the first time in 11 minutes, plus several hours, like she might actually survive this. It was nearly 9 that night before Helena finally set the phone down and turned her full attention back to Vivian, who'd been picked at takeout containers without tasting any of it, the adrenaline crash leaving her hollowed out and exhausted in a way that went bone deep. "You're staying at my place tonight," Helena said. It wasn't a question. "Tomorrow morning, Evelyn's seeing you at 9 for the consult, and after that, you and I are going through every piece of paper related to your marriage, your assets, everything. I want to know exactly what that man thinks he's walking away with, because I promise you, Viv, he is in for a very unpleasant surprise." "What do you mean?" Helena's expression shifted into something Vivian hadn't seen in years, the look their late Aunt Margaret used to get right before she revealed she'd been 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room the entire time. Margaret had died 18 months ago, a sharp, private woman who'd spent her career as a forensic accountant and had left behind a labyrinth of trusts and holdings that the family was still, technically, sorting through. "Margaret left you something," Helena said slowly. "I didn't want to bring it up before now because, honestly, Viv, it felt complicated and you had enough going on with the marriage settling in, all of it. But there's a trust, several trusts actually, set up before you married Alessandro, structured specifically so they'd remain separate property regardless of marital status." "What kind of trusts? How much are we talking about?" Helena hesitated, and in that hesitation, Vivian felt the floor of her understanding shift again, the second time in one day, though this shift felt entirely different from the one in the parking garage. This one felt like the ground opening up to reveal something solid underneath, rather than collapsing into a pit. "I haven't finished the full accounting," Helena admitted. Margaret's estate was complicated. Real estate holdings, investment accounts, some private equity stakes she never talked about with anyone. But based on the preliminary documents I've seen, Viv, we're talking 8 figures, conservatively. Vivian stared at her sister, the takeout container forgotten in her lap, the words 8 figures refusing to assemble themselves into anything coherent. "That's not possible. I would have known. Margaret would have told me, or you would have. Someone would have said something before now." Margaret structured it to stay quiet until the right moment. She was always cagey like that. You know how she was, trust issues a mile wide after what happened with Uncle Robert in the business. She wanted it protected, wanted you protected, even if she never explained exactly from what. Helena leaned forward, elbows on her knees, the fluorescent office light catching the exhaustion and fury both etched into her face. "I think, on some level, she didn't trust Alessandro. I think she saw something the rest of us missed, or didn't want to see. The implications of that landed slow, like a stone dropping through deep water, the ripples taking their time to reach the surface." Vivian thought about every dinner Margaret had attended at the Lincoln Park mansion, polite and watchful, never quite warming to Alessandro the way she'd warmed to other people in the family's orbit.
She'd always assumed it was generational stiffness, an older woman's natural wariness of her niece marrying into money and power that didn't quite make sense on paper. Maybe it had been something else entirely. He doesn't know, Vivian said slowly, about any of this. No, Helena said, he doesn't. And given what he just did to you in that parking garage, I'd suggest we keep it that way for as long as possible. Let him finalize whatever he thinks he's walking away clean from. Let him show his hand completely before we show ours. There was something in her sister's voice now, something almost predatory. The voice of a woman who'd spent 15 years dismantling the financial strategies of men who thought themselves untouchable. Vivian felt a small, sharp flicker of something she hadn't expected to feel today, underneath the grief and the fear and the raw ache of betrayal. Hope. Or maybe something even sharper than hope. The beginning of resolve. Her phone buzzed against the glass coffee table, screen lighting up with a text from a number she didn't recognize, area code local. She almost ignored it, exhaustion pulling at every part of her, but something made her glance down. This is Serena Moreau. I think we need to talk. It's about Alessandro, and it's about money, and I don't think either of us is going to like what the other one has to say. Vivian read it twice, 3 times, the name registering slowly through the fog of exhaustion. Serena Moreau. She didn't know the name, had never heard Alessandro mention it, but something about the phrasing, I don't think either of us is going to like what the other one has to say, sent a cold thread of dread spiraling through her stomach, cutting straight through whatever fragile hope had just started to take root. She held the phone out to Helena without a word, hand trembling slightly. Helena read it once, her expression hardening into something flat and dangerous, the courtroom mask sliding into place over whatever sisterly fury had been simmering underneath all evening. Don't respond yet, Helena said quietly, not until we know exactly who she is and exactly what she wants, because Viv, I don't think this divorce is anywhere close to as simple as Alessandro wants you to believe it is. I think we just found out we're missing a very big piece of the puzzle. Outside the window, the city lights blurred and scattered across the dark surface of the river, and somewhere across town, in a penthouse Vivian had never seen, a woman she'd never met was sitting with a phone in her hand, waiting to see if her message would change everything. Vivian didn't sleep. She lay on Helena's guest bed with the phone face down on the nightstand, staring at the ceiling, listening to the building settle around her like it was breathing. Every 20 minutes or so, she'd reach over and flip the phone face up again, just to look at the message. Like staring at it long enough might change the words, or reveal some hidden context that made it less terrifying. This is Serena Moreau. I think we need to talk. At 5:40 in the morning, she gave up on sleep entirely and padded out to Helena's kitchen, where she found her sister already awake, sitting at the island in yesterday's blouse, with her laptop open and 3 different browser tabs of public records pulled up. You didn't sleep either, Vivian said. Couldn't. Helena didn't look up. I ran a background check on Serena Moreau the second you went to bed. Took longer than it should have. She's careful, scrubbed most of her social media, but I found enough. And? Helena finally looked up, and the expression on her face made Vivian's stomach drop before a single word came out. She's 28. Works, or worked, as some kind of event consultant for a hospitality group Alessandro has a stake in. And Viv, she's pregnant. 6 months, give or take, based on a photo I found from a baby shower 3 weeks ago that somebody tagged before they thought better of it. The kitchen went very quiet. Vivian heard the refrigerator humming, heard her own pulse in her ears, a thick underwater throb that made the room tilt slightly. Pregnant, she repeated. Yeah. With his. Helena didn't answer that, which was its own answer, the kind of silence that confirmed things words couldn't soften. Vivian sat down hard on the kitchen stool, the cold marble counter the only thing keeping her upright. 6 months. Which meant, she did the math without wanting to, some traitor part of her brain running the calculation automatically. Which meant Alessandro had been with this woman, had gotten her pregnant, while Vivian was still his wife, still sleeping in his bed 3 nights a week when his schedule allowed, still believing, however foolishly, that whatever distance had crept into their marriage over the last year was just business, just stress, Just the ordinary erosion of a relationship built around a dangerous man's dangerous life. I'm going to be sick, she said, and meant it literally, the nausea rising fast and ugly. Breathe. Helena was around the counter in seconds, hand flat against Vivian's back. Breathe, Viv. Don't you dare let that bastard make you sick on top of everything else your body's already dealing with. He was with her while we were... The sentence wouldn't finish. She didn't have the words for the particular shape of this betrayal, layered on top of the cancer, on top of the divorce, on top of everything else collapsing in the span of 24 hours. I know. Helena's voice had gone hard and flat, the courtroom voice. The voice that meant she was filing this information away for use rather than letting herself feel it yet. And I think that text means she knows something we don't. Or she wants something from you. Either way, we need to find out which before we decide how to play this. Vivian's phone buzzed again on the counter where she'd carried it down. Another text, same unfamiliar number. I know this is insane to send. I don't even know if you'll respond. But Alessandro told me you two were already separated, that the divorce was basically done, that you'd agreed to everything months ago. I just found out that's not true. I found out yesterday. I think he's been lying to both of us. Vivian read it 3 times, hands shaking hard enough now that she had to set the phone down on the counter to keep reading. He told her we were already separated, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Months ago, while he was still coming home to me every week. Helena had gone very still, the particular stillness of a predator scenting blood in water. Respond, she said. Carefully, I'll help you word it. But Viv, I think we just found our first real crack in his armor. They met Serena Moreau 2 days later, not at the woman's request, but at Helena's insistence, in a private dining room at a restaurant on Randolph Street that Helena had chosen specifically because Alessandro had no connection to it, no staff on his payroll, no cameras he could access. Serena arrived first. Vivian almost didn't recognize her from the blurry tagged photo Helena had found. In person, she was smaller than Vivian expected, dark hair pulled back severely, a designer coat that did nothing to hide the 6-month swell of her belly, eyes red-rimmed in the universal way of someone who'd been crying recently and badly. Thank you for coming, Serena said, and her voice shook, the polish cracking immediately. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. Vivian sat across from her, Helena settling into the chair beside her like a bodyguard in a blazer. You're carrying my husband's child. Serena flinched at the bluntness, but didn't deny it. Yes. How long has it been going on? You and him. 2 years. The admission came out fast, like she'd been holding it for so long the words had pressure behind them. He told me he was already separated from you, living apart, that the marriage was over in every way that mattered. You two just hadn't made it official yet because of business reasons, optics, something about his position in the organization needing a wife on paper even after things had ended. That's a lie. Vivian's voice came out flatter than she expected, flat with the particular exhaustion of someone who'd run out of capacity for shock. I found out I had cancer 4 days ago. He was in my bed 2 weeks before that. Serena's face went through something complicated, horror, then a kind of dawning, sick understanding, the look of someone realizing the floor she'd been standing on for 2 years had never actually existed. He told me you two hadn't been intimate in over a year, she said quietly. He told me the marriage was finished. He promised that once the divorce went through, I'd... She stopped, swallowed, pressed a hand against her belly in an unconscious, protective gesture. He promised I'd be his wife, that I'd have the position, the title. What title? Helena's voice cut in, sharp and precise. What exactly did he promise you? That I'd be... Serena's voice dropped almost to nothing, glancing toward the closed door of the private room like she expected someone to be listening. That I'd take Vivian's place, in the organization, as his wife, his partner, the public face of the family once things were official. He's been introducing me to certain people already, quietly. Men, I think, are important to his business, though he never explained exactly what kind of business. The room went silent except for the distant clatter of the restaurant's kitchen beyond the closed door. Vivian felt something shift inside her chest, the grief curdling slowly into something else, something with sharper edges. He was planning to replace me, she said slowly, with you, before he even told me about the divorce, before I knew anything was wrong. I think so. Yes. Serena's hands were shaking now, too, both women's tremors meeting somewhere in the space between them like a current. I didn't know about you, not really, not as a person. He made you sound like an arrangement. Old money, useful for appearances, but finished. He made it sound like you wanted out too. I never wanted out. The words came out raw, scraped from somewhere deep. I loved him. God help me, 2 days ago I still loved him, and he was already planning my replacement, parading you in front of people like... She couldn't finish, couldn't make herself say the word wife. Not about this woman who hadn't asked to be lied to either, who was carrying a baby into the wreckage of a deception neither of them had built. Helena leaned forward, the courtroom edge sliding back into her voice. Serena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Has Alessandro made you any financial promises? In writing, verbally, anything? Serena hesitated, and something flickered across her face. Calculation, maybe. The first sign that whatever vulnerability had brought her to this lunch wasn't entirely uncomplicated by self-interest. He set up an account for me, she said slowly. For the baby. He said once everything was finalized, the divorce, the transition, there'd be more. A house. Access to certain accounts. Has he given you anything in writing, any documentation of these promises? No, nothing official. He's careful about that. Everything's verbal, everything's... Serena's jaw tightened, and Vivian watched something harden in the younger woman's face, the soft grief giving way to something colder. He's careful because he doesn't actually intend to follow through on half of it. I've started to suspect that for a while now. The promises keep changing shape every time I press for specifics. Welcome to the club, Vivian said, and the bitterness in her own voice surprised her. They talked for another hour, the conversation moving in uneasy circles. Serena revealing fragments of Alessandro's business dealings she'd overheard, half-understood references to moving money before the divorce finalizes, to protecting the estate, to conversations with men whose names meant nothing to Vivian but made Helena's expression sharpen with recognition every time they came up. By the time they left the restaurant, nothing was resolved, no alliance formally struck, but something had shifted. Vivian walked out into the gray Chicago afternoon with the unsettling sense that she'd just acquired an unlikely, uneasy ally, a woman who'd been used just as thoroughly as she had, even if the using had taken a different shape. The fight with Alessandro happened 4 days later, and it happened because he came to the Lincoln Park mansion uninvited, let himself in with his own key while Vivian was packing boxes in the upstairs bedroom, sorting through which of her belongings she'd take to the apartment Helena had helped her secure, and which she'd leave behind out of sheer exhaustion. She heard him before she saw him, the particular weight of his footsteps on the staircase, a rhythm she'd know anywhere after 6 years of marriage, and her whole body went rigid with a complicated cocktail of dread and something that infuriated her even as she felt it, a flicker of the old reflexive warmth, instinct refusing to catch up with what she now knew. "You're selling the house," he said from the doorway, not a greeting, just an accusation thrown like a knife. Vivian didn't turn around immediately, kept folding a sweater with hands that had gone unsteady. "I'm not selling anything. I'm packing. There's a difference." "Your sister's been talking to brokers. I have people who watch these things, Vivian. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Now she turned, and the sight of him, still handsome in that dangerous, controlled way, still wearing the kind of suit that costs more than most people's cars, made something in her chest twist with a violence that surprised her. "Helena's been talking to brokers because you tried to sell this house out from under me 3 days after the parking garage, Alessandro. Did you think I wouldn't find out about that?" His jaw ticked, the first crack in his composure. "That's different. This house is in my name." "This house is in both our names, actually, which you'd know if you'd bothered to read the deed instead of just assuming I'd roll over and let you liquidate everything before the ink dried on the divorce papers." Her voice had climbed, sharper now, the exhaustion and grief of the last week curdling fast into fury. "You tried to sell it to a broker named Patricia Wynne, for 11 million, 6 million under market value, because you wanted it gone fast before anyone could ask questions. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, quickly masked, the realization that she knew more than he'd expected. How do you... I have a sister who's a lawyer, Alessandro. Did you forget that detail in your rush to erase me from your life? I'm not trying to erase you. His voice had dropped, gone low and dangerous in the way that used to make grown men in his organization go pale. It didn't have the same effect on her anymore, or maybe it did, and she simply didn't care. I'm trying to move forward, the way we agreed. We didn't agree to anything. You told me you wanted a divorce in a parking garage 11 minutes after I found out I have cancer. There was no agreement. There was you deciding and me being informed. And now you've got lawyers circling. You've got your sisters poisoning you against me. You're acting like I'm some kind of monster for wanting to move on with my life. You got Serena Moreau pregnant 2 years ago. The words came out flat, surgical, and she watched them land like a physical blow, watched the blood actually drain from his face. While you were still sleeping in this house, while you were still calling me your wife in public, you told her our marriage was already over a year before you told me. You promised her my position, Alessandro, my title, while I had no idea any of this was happening. For a long moment he said nothing, and in his silence she saw the truth of it confirmed more completely than any words could have managed. How did you... He started, then stopped, recalibrating. It doesn't matter how you know. It doesn't change anything. Serena and I, that's not relevant to what's happening between us. Not relevant? Her laugh came out broken, disbelieving. You were planning my replacement before you ever told me you wanted out. You were lying to both of us simultaneously for years, and you're standing in my bedroom telling me it's not relevant? It's not about her. His voice had risen now too, the careful control finally cracking under pressure. It's about you getting sick, Vivian. It's about me not being able to handle watching you. Don't. Her voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare use the cancer as your excuse one more time. You'd already decided to leave me. The cancer just gave you a convenient moment to do it. A moment when you thought I'd be too broken to fight back. That's the real reason, isn't it? You thought I'd be weak. You thought a sick woman wouldn't have the strength to come after what's hers. His silence was its own confession. Get out, she said. Get out of this house, Alessandro, before I call Marco myself and have him drag you out. This is still my house, too. Then I'll see you in court, won't I? She turned back to her packing, hands shaking with adrenaline now instead of grief, a transformation she could feel happening in real time, something harder and colder taking root beneath the wreckage. Helena's already filing motions. You're going to find out exactly how much trouble you're in very soon, and I'm going to enjoy watching it happen. He left, but not before one last look back from the doorway, an expression she couldn't fully read. Anger, certainly, but underneath it something that looked almost like the first thread of fear, the recognition that the woman he'd dismissed as too sick and too broken to fight back had teeth after all. 3 days later, Evelyn Ashcroft performed the first surgery. A lumpectomy meant to clear margins before the more extensive procedure, and Vivian woke in recovery to find both her sisters in the room, Helena's laptop open on her lap, even in the hospital. Because apparently grief and surgery and the dismantling of a marriage all had to happen on the same timeline now, whether anyone's body could handle it or not. How'd it go? Vivian's voice came out thick, the anesthesia still fogging everything at the edges. Clean margins, Evelyn said, taking her hand. Evelyn looked exhausted in a way Vivian rarely saw from her. Dark circles, hair scraped back without its usual precision. We got everything we were aiming for today. You'll need the full mastectomy next, like we discussed, but this went exactly the way I wanted it to. That's good. Vivian let her eyes drift closed for a moment, exhaustion pulling at her. That's really good. It is. Evelyn's hand tightened around hers. And while you were under, Helena found something else. Vivian's eyes opened again, some instinct cutting through the anesthesia fog. What kind of something? Helena turned her laptop around, the screen showing what looked like a series of financial documents, transfer records, account numbers blacked out in places but not all the way. Alessandro's been moving money, Helena said quietly. A lot of it. through 3 different shell companies registered in Delaware, transferring assets out of accounts that are still technically marital property. Started the day after he found out you knew about Serena. How much? Conservatively, 40 million. And Viv? Helena's expression had gone grim, the courtroom mask slipping to reveal something genuinely worried underneath. Some of this money traces back to accounts he's not even supposed to have access to. Accounts connected to the Alliance, the Council of Family Heads he answers to. If he's been skimming from organizational funds to hide assets from you in the divorce, that's not just a marital property violation. That's the kind of thing that gets a man killed in his world, not just sued. The hospital room went quiet, except for the steady beep of Vivian's monitor. He's that desperate, Vivian said slowly. He's risking his own life, stealing from people who could have him killed for it, just to make sure I don't get $1 more than he thinks I deserve. I think it's bigger than that, Evelyn said carefully. I think he's scared, Viv. I think somewhere in the last week, word's gotten back to him about Margaret's trusts, about what you're actually worth. And I think a man like that, a man whose entire identity is built around being the one with power, the one who controls everything. I think finding out his sick, soon-to-be ex-wife is worth more than he is, might be doing something to him that has nothing to do with love and everything to do with rage. Vivian thought about the look on his face in the bedroom doorway, that flicker she hadn't been able to fully name. Fear, she'd thought. But maybe it had been something closer to recalculation. A predator realizing the prey he'd dismissed as helpless had resources he hadn't accounted for, and adjusting his strategy accordingly. What do we do, she asked, if he finds out everything? About Margaret's trusts, the full number? Helena and Evelyn exchanged a look over Vivian's hospital bed, the kind of look sisters share when they're deciding how much truth a person recovering from surgery can actually absorb. Helena, Vivian pressed, what do we do? I think, Helena said slowly, that we make sure he finds out on our terms, not his. I think we control exactly when and how that information reaches him, because right now we have the only real leverage in this entire fight, and the second he learns the truth, that leverage starts working against us instead of for us. And if he finds out before we're ready, Helena's expression hardened into something Vivian had never quite seen on her sister's face before, something that looked almost like fear held very tightly in check. Then God help all of us, Helena said, because a man like Alessandro De Luca doesn't lose gracefully, Viv, and from what I've found in these documents, I don't think he's planning on losing at all. The monitor beside Vivian's bed beeped steadily, marking time in a room that suddenly felt far too small for the weight of what was coming. And outside the window, the Chicago skyline blurred gray and indifferent against a sky already darkening toward evening, holding its silence about everything still hidden in the wreckage of a marriage built on lies neither sister could yet see the full shape of. The call came at 2:14 in the morning, and Vivian would remember that number for the rest of her life, the way the digital clock glowed red against the dark of Helena's guest bedroom where she was still staying, 3 weeks post-surgery, drains still taped beneath her shirt, sleep still a fragile and easily broken thing. Helena's voice on the other end was wrong. Too fast, too thin, none of the courtroom precision Vivian had come to rely on over the last month. Turn on the news, Channel 7, now. Helena, it's 2 in the morning. What? Turn it on, Viv, please. Something in her sister's voice made Vivian's stomach drop before she even reached for the remote. She fumbled it in the dark, hands clumsy with sleep and the dull ache that never fully left her chest these days, and the television flared to life with the cold blue light of a breaking news graphic. A reporter standing outside a building Vivian didn't immediately recognize, police lights strobing red and blue across her face. Sus. Developing story out of the Gold Coast tonight, where sources close to the investigation say federal agents executed a coordinated raid on properties connected to alleged organized crime figure Alessandro De Luca. Sources indicate the raids are part of a broader racketeering investigation that's been building for over a year, with agents seizing financial records, electronic devices, and, we're getting word now, several individuals taken into custody for questioning. Helena! Vivian's voice came out strangled. What is this? I don't know yet. I'm trying to find out. But Viv, listen to me. This changes everything. If the feds have been building a case for a year, that means they've probably had eyes on his finances for months, maybe longer, which means what? A pause on the line, heavy enough that Vivian could hear her sister's breath catching. Which means our entire strategy, everything we've built around the divorce, around exposing his asset transfers, we might be walking into the middle of a federal investigation without even knowing it. And if that's true, Viv, every move we've made over the last month, every document Helena's pulled, every account she's traced, someone's been watching all of it. We don't know who or for how long, or whether we just became collateral damage in something so much bigger than your marriage. Vivian sat frozen on the edge of the bed, the television's blue light flickering across her face, watching footage of black SUVs and agents in windbreakers carrying boxes out of a building she now recognized as one of Alessandro's holding companies downtown. Is he arrested? They're not naming him yet, just sources close to the investigation. But Viv, I need you to brace yourself for something because I think there's a very real chance this isn't just about him. What do you mean? I mean Margaret's trusts. Helena's voice had dropped. Careful now, the way you'd speak around an open wound. I've spent 3 weeks digging through her holdings to build your case, and there's been something bothering me, something I didn't want to bring up until I was sure. Some of the entities Margaret used to structure your trusts, they overlap. Not completely, but enough that it can't be coincidence. Some of the same registered agents, the same Delaware filing addresses, as accounts connected to Alessandro's organization. The room went very still. Vivian felt something cold spreading through her chest, a dread with no clear shape yet, just the sense of a floor she'd thought was solid beginning to crack beneath her feet for the second time in a month. What are you saying, Helena? I'm saying I don't think Margaret set up those trusts in a vacuum. I think there's a connection between your aunt's money and Alessandro's world that none of us have understood yet, and I think we're about to find out exactly what it is, whether we're ready or not. The knock on Helena's apartment door came 4 hours later, while the sky outside was still doing its reluctant gray transition into dawn, and it wasn't Marco, wasn't Alessandro, wasn't anyone Vivian recognized. 2 people in dark suits, federal credentials held up before either of them said a word. Vivian DeLuca? Special Agent Marcus Reyes, FBI. This is Agent Sarah Chen. We need to speak with you about your husband's business affairs and about your late aunt, Margaret Ashcroft. They sat in Helena's living room, Helena present as counsel, though she kept reminding everyone, voice tight, that she was a financial attorney and not a criminal defense specialist, that they should all be careful about what got said before Vivian had proper representation. While Agent Reyes laid out a story that made the floor of Vivian's understanding crack apart entirely. Your aunt, Reyes said, sliding a folder across the coffee table, wasn't just a forensic accountant, Mrs. DeLuca. For the last 6 years of her life, she was a confidential informant for the Bureau, providing financial intelligence on organized crime networks operating through Chicago real estate and private equity, including, specifically, networks connected to your husband's organization. That's not possible. Vivian heard her own voice as if from a great distance, thin and disbelieving. Margaret hated risk. She was careful, methodical. She wasn't the kind of person She was exactly the kind of person who could do this work without anyone suspecting, Agent Chen said quietly. That was the point. Nobody looks twice at a quiet, private forensic accountant going through old family business records. It was the perfect cover. Why would she help you? What did she have against Alessandro? Reyes and Chen exchanged a glance, the particular look of people deciding how much truth a person could absorb in one sitting, the same look Helena and Evelyn had shared over her hospital bed weeks ago. Your aunt's husband, Reyes said carefully. Your Uncle Robert. The official story in your family was that his business failed and he died of a heart attack a decade ago. That's not entirely accurate. The room had gone so quiet, Vivian could hear the refrigerator humming in Helena's kitchen, could hear her own pulse roaring in her ears. Robert Ashcroft was laundering money for the DeLuca organization, Reyes continued. Had been for years, before your aunt knew any of it. When he tried to walk away from the arrangement, tried to extract himself and the business he'd built with what he thought was clean capital, he was killed, made to look like a heart attack. Margaret found out the truth 18 months after his death,
going through his old financial records trying to understand why certain accounts didn't reconcile. Vivian felt the room tilt, felt Helena's hand grip her shoulder hard enough to hurt. "Alessandro," Vivian said slowly, the name tasting like poison in her mouth. "Alessandro's organization killed my uncle." "We believe so. We've never been able to make a case stick. The murder happened before Alessandro had full control of the family. His father was still running things then, but Alessandro was already deeply involved in operations by that point. Your aunt believed he had direct knowledge, possibly direct involvement."
It's why she spent the rest of her life building a case against the organization from the inside, using her accounting skills to trace money she had unique access to because of her position in your family. "And the trusts," Vivian said, the pieces assembling themselves into a shape she didn't want to see. "Margaret's trusts, the ones she left me. They're not just inheritance, are they?" "No, Mrs. DeLuca." Chen's voice had gone gentle now, the gentleness of someone delivering news they knew would land like a blow. "Some of those accounts contain assets we believe Margaret recovered, indirectly, from the same networks that killed her husband. She structured the trusts specifically so they'd pass to you, the closest thing she had to a daughter, with documentation embedded that could be activated to support a federal case, if it ever became necessary. We believe she always intended this evidence to surface eventually. She just didn't know when or under what circumstances." "You're telling me," Vivian said, and her voice had gone strange and flat now, shock flattening every register of feeling into something cold and distant, "that my aunt spent the last years of her life building a financial weapon against my own husband's organization and gave it to me without ever telling me what it was or why, or that marrying Alessandro had put me directly in the blast radius of a decade-long federal investigation." "We believe she didn't tell you," Reyes said carefully, "because telling you would have put you in danger before she had enough evidence assembled to actually protect you. Margaret played a very long game, Mrs. DeLuca. We think she was waiting for the right moment to either bring you into the investigation safely or to ensure the assets would protect you regardless if anything happened to her before that moment arrived. And now she's dead, and I'm sitting here with millions of dollars connected to the murder of my own uncle, married to the man who might have ordered it, and you're telling me all of this in my sister's living room at 6 a.m. while federal agents are raiding my husband's properties across the city." Nobody answered that because there was nothing to say that could soften the brutal shape of it. "What do you need from me?" Vivian finally asked, voice hollowed out. "We need you to consider testifying," Reyes said, "about the divorce, about the financial transfers you and your sister have already documented, about anything you know regarding Alessandro's business operations. We've been building this case for 14 months, Mrs. DeLuca. Your aunt's death slowed our progress significantly. She was our deepest source inside the organization's financial structure. But the divorce, the asset transfers your husband's been making, the desperation he's showing trying to hide money from you, it's accelerated everything. We're closer than we've ever been. We just need someone willing to put a face and a voice to the paper trail." "If I do this," Vivian said slowly, "if I testify, what happens to me, to my sisters?" "We can offer protection. Not witness relocation, not unless the threat level escalates significantly, but security, monitoring, resources to keep you safe through the trial process. I won't lie to you and pretend there's no risk. A man like Alessandro DeLuca doesn't take betrayal well, and discovering his wife helped build the case that takes down his entire organization. That's a different category of enemy than a divorce makes him." Vivian sat in the gray morning light filtering through Helena's windows, her body still healing from surgery, her marriage already in ashes, her entire understanding of her own family history just upended by two strangers with federal badges, and felt something shift inside her chest that didn't feel like fear anymore. Not exactly. It felt like the last soft, hopeful part of her finally hardening into something with an edge. "I'll do it," she said. "Whatever you need. I'll testify." Helena waited until the agents left before she turned to Vivian, expression a complicated mixture of fury, fear, and something that looked almost like pride, fighting for space on her face all at once. "You don't have to decide this right now," Helena said. "You just had surgery 3 weeks ago, Viv. You're still healing, and now you're talking about testifying against a man who runs an entire criminal empire." "I already decided." Vivian's voice came out steadier than she felt,
steadier than she had any right to feel given the magnitude of what had just happened. He tried to discard me because he thought cancer made me weak, Helena. He's been lying to me for years, planning my replacement. Probably knew something about Uncle Robert this whole time and never said a word. I'm done being the person things happen to. I want to be the person who makes things happen now. Helena studied her for a long moment, and something in her sister's expression shifted, the protective fury softening into something that looked like recognition. Margaret would be proud of you, Helena said quietly. I think she'd recognize exactly who you're becoming right now. Before Vivian could respond, her phone buzzed against the coffee table, a number she didn't recognize, area code matching nothing local. She almost let it go to voicemail, exhausted past the point of caring about anything else today, but some instinct made her answer. Vivian DeLuca? A man's voice, older, careful, accented in a way she couldn't immediately place. Who is this? My name is Salvatore Greco. I'm calling on behalf of the Alliance, the council that oversees organizational matters for families including your husband's. I think it would be in everyone's interest if we spoke privately, as soon as possible, before things escalate further than they already have. Vivian felt Helena go rigid beside her, clearly able to hear enough of the conversation to understand the gravity of who was calling. What kind of things? Vivian said carefully. Are we talking about escalating? Your husband, Greco said, has been under investigation by our own internal counsel for several weeks now, separate from whatever the federal government is doing. We've become aware of significant financial irregularities, attempts to move organizational funds without authorization, and behavior that several senior members consider a serious liability to the family's stability. The federal raids tonight have only accelerated concerns that were already building. Why are you telling me this? Because, Mrs. DeLuca, I think you and I might have a shared interest in seeing Alessandro held accountable for his actions, and I think you should know that you may have allies in this fight you didn't expect to find. The Council does not look favorably on men who steal from their own organization to hide assets from a dying wife. Whatever else we are, Mrs. DeLuca, we are not without our own code. The phrase dying wife landed like a slap, and Vivian's voice sharpened before she could stop it. I'm not dying. The surgery was successful. I'm fighting this, and I'm winning. A pause on the line, something that might have been the ghost of respect threading through it. My apologies. Poor choice of words. What I mean to say is this. Several members of the council would be willing to provide testimony, documentation, support for whatever legal or federal action you're pursuing against Alessandro if it serves to remove him from his position. We have been patient with his leadership for some time. That patience is wearing thin. You want me to help you get rid of him? Vivian said slowly, so someone else in your organization can take his place. I want, Greco said, voice taking on a harder edge now, an organization that isn't run by a man stupid enough to attract a year-long federal investigation through his own greed and carelessness. Whatever your reasons, Mrs. DeLuca, and whatever mine, I think we want the same outcome. I think that makes us, however briefly, useful to one another. After he hung up, Vivian sat very still, phone still warm in her hand, the weight of the conversation settling slowly over her like a fog. He's offering us a weapon, she said to Helena. Internal testimony. From inside the organization itself. That's not a weapon, Helena said quietly. That's an alliance with people more dangerous than Alessandro could ever be on his own. Viv, I need you to understand what you might be stepping into here. The federal case is one thing, structured, legal, with rules and protections. This is something else entirely. If you start working with people inside that organization, even people who claim to be on your side, you're playing a game with no rules at all. I know. Do you? Because 3 weeks ago you were a woman packing boxes in a bedroom trying to figure out which sweaters to keep. Now you're talking about testifying against a federal racketeering target while simultaneously accepting help from a mafia council that wants your husband removed for their own reasons. This isn't the same fight anymore, Viv. This is something much bigger and much more dangerous than a divorce. Vivian looked at her sister, feeling something settle inside her chest, cold and clear and entirely new. Then I guess I'm not the same person anymore either. The text from Serena arrived that evening,
while Vivian was still sitting in Helena's living room trying to absorb the weight of everything the day had delivered. Federal agents and dead uncles and mafia councils all collapsing together into a single, overwhelming reality she hadn't asked for and couldn't escape. "Did you see the news? Please tell me you're somewhere safe. I think he knows someone's been talking to the feds. I think he might know it's connected to you." Vivian's stomach dropped, the cold dread she'd felt all day sharpening suddenly into something closer to actual fear. "What do you mean he knows?" The response took 3 full minutes to arrive, long enough that Vivian had time to imagine a dozen different catastrophes before her phone finally buzzed again. "He came to my place an hour ago. He was different, scared, but also angry in a way I've never seen before. He kept asking who I'd been talking to, whether I'd said anything to anyone about us, about the money he set up. When I said no, he didn't believe me. He grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks, Vivian. I'm scared. I think he's starting to realize everything is falling apart, and I don't think he's going to handle it well." Vivian read the message twice, hands gone cold despite the warmth of Helena's apartment, and felt something in her chest crack open into pure, undiluted alarm. "Are you safe right now? Is he still there? He left 20 minutes ago." "But Vivian, there's something else. Something I overheard while he was on the phone before he came to confront me. I don't think it was about us at all. I think it was about you." "What did you hear?" The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, Serena clearly typing and deleting, deciding how much to say. "He was talking to someone about a problem that needed to disappear before it could testify. He used your name, Vivian. He said your name, and he said the word disappear. And then he saw me standing in the doorway, and he stopped talking completely and told me I misheard everything." Vivian stared at the screen, the words rearranging themselves into a shape so terrifying she had to read them 4 times before her brain would fully process what they meant. He'd called someone. He'd used her name. He'd used the word disappear. Across the room, Helena was watching her face change, already reaching for her own phone, already understanding without being told that whatever had just arrived on Vivian's screen had transformed the entire shape of the danger they were standing in. "Viv," Helena said, voice gone very careful, very controlled in the particular way that meant she was holding back panic by sheer force of will. "What did she say?" Vivian's hands had started shaking too hard to hold the phone steady, the device nearly slipping from her grip as the full weight of the message finally landed, undeniable and absolute. "He's not just trying to win the divorce anymore," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "He's not just trying to hide money or salvage his reputation with the council. Helena, I think my husband just gave an order to have me killed." Agent Reyes arrived in 19 minutes, which felt like 19 years, Vivian counting every one of them while standing pressed against Helena's living room wall, away from the windows, because some animal part of her brain had decided windows meant exposure, meant a clear shot, meant the kind of vulnerability she could no longer afford to give anyone. "Walk me through exactly what the message said." Reyes had a notepad out, but his eyes kept flicking to the door, to the windows, doing the same threat assessment Vivian's body had already done instinctively. "Word for word, if you can." "He said disappear." Vivian's voice had gone strange, flattened by adrenaline into something almost clinical. "Serena said he used my name and the word disappear, and a problem that needed to disappear before it could testify." "That's not enough for an arrest." Reyes said it like he hated saying it, jaw tight with the particular frustration of a man whose job ran on evidence while bodies operated on instinct. Secondhand reporting of an overheard phone call, no recording, no names, no specifics. A defense attorney would tear it apart in about 4 seconds. "So what? We just wait? We wait until something happens to confirm it?" "No." Reyes's voice sharpened. "We get you somewhere secure tonight, immediately, and we get a wire on Serena Moreau if she's willing, because if he's already moved against her once, grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise, the chance he goes further is not something I'm willing to gamble on. And we accelerate the timeline on your testimony. If he knows the net's closing, sitting and waiting just gives him more time to plan something we can't undo." Helena had gone very pale, standing near the kitchen island with both arms wrapped around herself, a posture Vivian hadn't seen from her steel-spined sisters since their father's funeral. "Where do we go?" Helena asked. Tonight, right now, where does she go that's actually safe? We have a facility. Reyes was already moving, already on his phone with someone. Low, urgent words about transport and detail assignments. Not full witness protection, your sister hasn't made that level of commitment yet, but secure, monitored, agents on rotation. I need both of you ready to move in 10 minutes. Vivian's phone buzzed against the counter, and every person in the room flinched at the sound, the particular jumpiness of people whose nervous systems had stopped distinguishing between ordinary and catastrophic. It was Serena again. He's coming back. I can hear his car. I think he knows I talked to someone. Vivian, I'm scared. I don't know what to do. Should I run? Should I call the police? The message cut off mid-sentence. Vivian stared at the screen, waiting for the dots to appear. For anything, watching seconds stretch into a full minute with nothing. No response, no further text, just the last broken sentence hanging there in digital silence. Reyes. Her voice came out sharp enough to cut through his phone call. Something's wrong. She stopped responding mid-message. He's there right now, and I think something's happening. Reyes ended his call instantly, full attention swinging back to her. Address, now. I don't have her exact address. I never asked. We only ever met at the restaurant. Vivian's mind raced, grasping for anything useful, the panic making her thoughts scatter and reform too fast to hold on to. Helena, the background check. You pulled her records. You have to have an address. Helena was already moving, laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed that belied how badly her hands were shaking. Got it. River North, a building on Erie Street. Sending it to you now, Agent Reyes. Stay here, both of you. Stay exactly here. Do not leave this apartment under any circumstances. Reyes was already moving toward the door, phone back to his ear, voice gone hard and clipped with command. I need backup to Erie Street. Possible domestic violence in progress. Suspect Alessandro De Luca. Repeat. Suspect is De Luca. Treat as armed. And the door shut behind him before he finished the sentence, and Vivian stood frozen in the sudden silence of Helena's apartment, her own pulse roaring loud enough to drown out everything else, the unfinished text from Serena still glowing accusingly on her phone screen. I don't... The weight stretched into something unbearable, Helena pacing the length of the living room while Vivian sat rigid on the couch, both of them watching the door, watching their phones, watching nothing happen for 43 agonizing minutes, while somewhere across the city, a woman who'd done nothing except get pregnant by the wrong man might be paying for that mistake with her life. When Reyes finally called, his voice carried a complicated mixture of relief and grim fury that told Vivian everything before he even finished the first sentence. She's alive. She's hurt. He hit her, possibly worse. Paramedics are with her now, but she's alive and the baby's vitals are stable. We got there in time. Vivian's knees actually buckled, Helena catching her arm before she hit the floor, both of them sliding down to sit hard on the living room rug, the adrenaline crash arriving so fast and total it felt like drowning. Where's Alessandro? Vivian managed. Did you get him? A pause on the line, and in that pause, Vivian felt something cold settle back into her chest, the relief evaporating instantly. He was gone before we arrived. Neighbors heard shouting, sounds of a struggle. Called it in themselves about 10 minutes before your text alerted us. We think he realized he'd gone too far, that there were witnesses, and ran before anyone could stop him. Reyes's voice had gone hard, professional fury barely contained. We have a warrant out now. Attempted murder, assault, on top of everything else we're already building. But Vivian, I need you to understand what this means. He's not thinking strategically anymore. A man like him, calculated, controlled, careful, he just lost all of that in one night. He's cornered, he's desperate, and cornered desperate men do things that don't follow any logic you can predict. What do I do? You come in. Tonight. Full federal protection, not the soft version we discussed earlier. We move you to a secure facility, we accelerate your testimony, and we end this before he has time to plan whatever comes next. The federal facility was a nondescript building in the suburbs, all beige walls and reinforced windows that didn't look reinforced. Agents in plain clothes who moved through the halls with the particular alertness of people whose entire job was anticipating violence before it arrived. Vivian sat in a small conference room 3 days later, exhausted in a way that went past physical, past emotional, and to some third category she didn't have a name for, while Helena and a federal prosecutor named Diane Castellano walked her through what testifying would actually look like. "The alliance has been more cooperative than we expected," Castellano said, sliding a folder across the table. "Salvatore Greco's testimony alone gives us insight into 18 months of financial activity we'd only been able to partially reconstruct. Combined with your documentation, Mrs. DeLuca, and your aunt's original intelligence, we have what I'd call an exceptionally strong case. Racketeering, money laundering, and now, with the assault on Serena Moreau, we're adding attempted murder and witness intimidation to the charges." "When does this happen?" Vivian's voice came out tired, stretched thin. "Grand jury convenes in 4 days. After that, assuming indictment, which I have no doubt it will be, the case moves to trial. Could be months before that actually happens, but the protective custody, the security detail, that stays in place the entire time." "Months," Vivian repeated. "Months of living in a federal facility, looking over my shoulder, waiting for a trial that might not even—" "It will happen," Castellano said firmly. "The evidence is overwhelming, but Mrs. DeLuca, I won't lie to you about the danger. Alessandro DeLuca is still out there. We believe he's gone underground, possibly with help from remaining loyalists in his organization, men who haven't yet defected to whatever faction Greco represents. A man with his resources doesn't simply disappear without a plan." Vivian's phone, sitting on the table in front of her, buzzed with a notification, and every person in the room went still, the same conditioned response they'd all developed over the last 72 hours. It was a news alert. Local Chicago station, breaking story. DeLuca divorce finalization hearing moved up. Judge cites urgent circumstances. "What is this?" Vivian turned the phone toward Helena, hands not quite steady. Helena scanned it fast, expression shifting through confusion into something sharper. The judge moved up the final divorce hearing. Originally scheduled for 6 weeks out, now set for tomorrow morning. Citing, she squinted at the screen, citing urgent circumstances related to the criminal investigation and the safety of the parties involved. Tomorrow. Castellano's expression had gone tight, calculating. That's fast. Unusually fast. Even given everything happening. Could he force me to appear? Vivian's stomach had gone tight with dread. If I don't show up, does he win by default? No, but Vivian, Helena set the phone down carefully, like it might detonate. If you don't show up, you lose the chance to have the asset division finalized on your terms, while we still control the timing of when he learns about Margaret's trusts. If this hearing happens and you're not there to represent your position, the court could rule based on incomplete information, and we lose our leverage at exactly the moment we need it most. You're saying I need to go to a courthouse, in public, exposed, less than 3 days after he tried to have a pregnant woman killed because she might testify against him. I'm saying, Helena said slowly, that I think this is a trap. I think he's using the legal system itself to flush you out into the open, somewhere predictable, somewhere with a fixed time and location that he can plan around. Castellano was already nodding, pulling out her own phone. We can provide full security detail for a courthouse appearance. Federal agents, perimeter control, the works. If he's planning something, a controlled environment with our people watching every entrance is actually safer than continuing to hide while he has unlimited time to find another angle. Vivian sat in the conference room's harsh fluorescent light, feeling the walls of every option closing in around her, every choice leading toward the same terrifying conclusion. There was no version of this where she got to stay safely hidden. The only way through was directly into the open, into a courtroom, face to face with the man who'd ordered her death less than a week ago. Fine, she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected, something hard and resolved settling into place beneath the fear. I'll go, but I want Evelyn there too, and I want to know exactly how many agents are covering that building before I walk through the door. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and cold, Chicago doing its early winter impression of the entire city, holding its breath. Vivian stood in the federal facility's bathroom at 6 a.m, staring at her reflection, running her fingers along the scar tissue beneath her shirt, where the mastectomy had left its permanent mark. the physical evidence of everything her body had survived in the last 6 weeks. "You don't have to do this," Evelyn said from the doorway, having arrived at dawn specifically to be there. Scrubs traded for ordinary clothes, surgeons' hands trembling slightly with an emotion that had nothing to do with operating rooms. "We could ask for a continuance, buy more time, and give him more time to find another way to hurt someone I love." Vivian turned from the mirror, something flinty and resolved in her expression that hadn't been there a month ago. "No, I'm done running from this. I survived the surgery. I survived him trying to erase me before I even started chemo. I am not going to let him control the timeline of my own life one more day." The courthouse, when they arrived, was a fortress of federal vehicles and visible security. Agents posted at every entrance. Plainclothes officers Vivian recognized from the safe facility scattered through the surrounding blocks. The sight of it should have been reassuring. Instead, it just confirmed how seriously everyone believed the threat actually was. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with a tension that had nothing to do with ordinary divorce proceedings. Reporters had gotten wind of the connection to the federal racketeering case. Impossible to keep something this large fully contained, and the gallery was packed with press alongside the usual courtroom regulars, all of them sensing they were about to witness something far bigger than an ordinary asset division. Alessandro arrived 12 minutes late, flanked by 2 attorneys, and Vivian noted with a cold jolt, no security of his own, no Marco, no men in dark suits standing at careful attention. He looked different than she remembered, gaunt in a way that suggested the last week had cost him something physical as well as strategic, dark circles beneath his eyes, a tightness around his mouth that hadn't been there even in the worst moments of their confrontation in the Lincoln Park bedroom. He didn't look at her as he took his seat. That, more than anything else, told her how much had changed. Judge Patricia Alvarez took the bench with the brisk efficiency of someone who understood exactly how much was riding on the proceedings about to unfold, and the energy in the room sharpened immediately. Every reporter's pen poised, every federal agent positioned near an exit with eyes constantly scanning the gallery. "This court is aware," Alvarez began, "of the extraordinary circumstances surrounding this case, including pending federal charges against the respondent that this court will not be litigating today. We are here solely to finalize the division of marital assets. Mrs. DeLuca's counsel has submitted extensive documentation regarding separate property claims. Mr. DeLuca's counsel has contested several of these claims. I intend to move through this efficiently, given the circumstances." Helena rose first, moving through the financial evidence with the precise, devastating clarity Vivian had watched her sister wield for weeks now, laying out Margaret's trusts, the separate property protections established years before the marriage. Document after document building an unassailable wall around everything Alessandro had hoped to claim. Then it was Alessandro's attorney's turn, and Vivian watched the man rise with visible discomfort, clearly aware of how thin his ground had become. "Your Honor, my client maintains that significant marital assets were commingled during the course of the marriage, that improvements made to properties, investments managed jointly." Counsel. Alvarez's voice cut through with surgical precision. "I've reviewed the documentation. The trust structures predate the marriage by years, were maintained as separate property throughout, with clear documentation of independent management. Unless you have evidence contradicting this that wasn't included in your filing, I'm not inclined to entertain commingling arguments." The attorney's jaw tightened, glanced toward Alessandro for direction, found none coming. Vivian watched the moment land, watched the last thread of her husband's legal strategy unravel in real time in front of a packed courtroom and a gallery full of reporters who'd remember every second of it. "Mr. DeLuca," Alvarez said, voice gone sharper now, "I want to address something directly before we proceed further. There are serious allegations on the record regarding your conduct during these proceedings, including allegations of witness intimidation connected to a pending federal investigation. I'm going to ask you directly, on the record, did you order or participate in any action intended to harm Mrs. DeLuca or any other witness in this matter?" The courtroom went utterly silent, the kind of silence that had weight, that pressed against the walls and the ceiling and every person holding their breath inside it. Alessandro rose slowly from his seat, and for the first time since he'd walked in, he looked directly at Vivian, something raw and unguarded moving behind his eyes that she'd never seen from him before, not once in 6 years of marriage. "Your Honor," he said, voice rough, stripped of its usual controlled confidence, "I'd like to make a statement." His attorney's hand shot out, gripping his arm, urgent whispered warning that Alessandro shook off without even looking down. "I need to say this," he said, louder now, and Vivian felt her entire body go rigid, every instinct screaming that whatever came next was going to change everything, that the floor she'd finally found beneath her feet was about to crack open one more time, in front of cameras, in front of reporters, in front of the entire city that would read about it by tomorrow morning. The silence stretched so long that Vivian could hear the building's ventilation system humming overhead, could hear a reporter's pen scratch against a notepad 3 rows back, could hear her own heartbeat thudding slow and hard against the scar tissue beneath her shirt. "I didn't order anyone killed." Alessandro's voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment he sounded nothing like the man who'd told her, flat and cold, that he refused to watch her fade away. "What I said to Serena, what she overheard, I was talking about a different problem. A business associate who'd become a federal informant. I swear before this court, I never gave an order against Vivian. I went to Serena's apartment because I was angry, because I just found out the truth about Margaret's trust an hour earlier, and I let that anger turn into something I can't undo now. I hit her, I own that, but I did not try to have my wife killed." "That's a remarkable distinction to draw, Mr. DeLuca," Judge Alvarez said, voice dry as paper, "given that you're confessing to assault on a pregnant woman in open court as though it offers you some kind of moral high ground." A ripple moved through the gallery, reporters' pens moving faster now, and Vivian watched Alessandro's attorney drop his head into his hand, the universal posture of a lawyer watching his client destroy himself in real time. "I'm not asking for a high ground." Alessandro's eyes found Vivian's again, and something in them looked almost pleading now, stripped raw in a way she'd never witnessed in 6 years of marriage. "I'm asking the record to reflect the truth. Because the truth is bad enough without people believing I'm a man who orders his wife murdered. The truth is I panicked when I learned what she was actually worth. 30 million in trusts I never knew existed. I'd already pushed her away over nothing, over fear, and then I found out the woman I threw away for being weak was worth more than everything I'd built my entire identity protecting." The words landed in the courtroom like a physical blow, and Vivian felt them land inside her chest too, a vicious, clarifying pain that cut through 6 years of marriage in a single sentence. "If I'd known how wealthy Vivian really was," Alessandro said, voice dropping, the courtroom straining to hear him now, "I never would have left." The silence that followed was total. Vivian sat very still, feeling something inside her finally, completely break. Not her heart, that had already broken weeks ago in a parking garage, but some last fragile thread of hope she hadn't even realized she was still holding on to. Some quiet, foolish part of her that had wondered, despite everything, whether some version of the man she'd married still existed underneath the wreckage. That thread snapped clean now, and what replaced it wasn't grief. It was clarity, cold and absolute. He hadn't left her because she was sick. He'd left her because he thought she was worthless, and the only thing that had ever made him reconsider was discovering she wasn't. "Mr. DeLuca." Judge Alvarez's voice had gone flat with something like disgust, barely contained beneath judicial composure. "I want to make sure this court understands what you've just said. You're testifying, under oath, that the sole catalyst for any regret regarding the dissolution of this marriage was the discovery of your wife's financial worth. Not the cruelty of abandoning her during a cancer diagnosis, not the affair you conducted for 2 years prior, not the assault you've just confessed to committing against another woman 3 days ago. Her money, that was the variable that mattered." Alessandro said nothing. His silence in that moment was more complete and more damning than any words could have been. "This court has heard enough," Alvarez said. "We'll proceed to ruling." The ruling came swift and absolute. Every asset Margaret had protected, the trusts, the investment accounts, the real estate holdings, remained entirely and exclusively Vivian's, untouched by any claim of marital commingling. The Lincoln Park mansion, jointly titled, was ordered sold, proceeds split according to original contribution, which meant Vivian walked away with the overwhelming majority, given her family's initial down payment a decade before the wedding.
Alessandro's attempt to claim spousal support, buried in a footnote his attorney had clearly hoped would go unnoticed, was dismissed outright. The judge noting dryly that a man who'd attempted to liquidate marital property without his wife's knowledge and consent had no standing to request ongoing financial support from the same wife. But it was the final paragraph of the ruling that Vivian would remember most clearly. The part where Alvarez looked directly at Alessandro and stated, for the record, that his conduct throughout the proceedings, the attempted asset concealment, the confessed assault, the courtroom admission regarding his motivations, would be formally noted and forwarded to federal prosecutors handling the related racketeering case as evidence of character and pattern of behavior relevant to sentencing should a conviction occur. Alessandro sat through all of it without moving, without speaking again, his attorney beside him radiating the particular exhaustion of a man who'd just watched a case implode beyond any hope of salvage. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed in a wall of microphones and shouted questions, and Vivian walked through them flanked by Helena, Evelyn, and 2 federal agents saying nothing, letting her silence speak louder than any statement could have. Cameras flashed. Questions about the divorce, about the federal case, about Serena Moreau, about $30 million, blurred together into noise she'd already decided not to absorb. It was 3 weeks later, in a different courtroom, that Vivian watched federal agents lead Alessandro De Luca out in handcuffs following his arraignment on racketeering, money laundering, and attempted witness intimidation charges, the assault against Serena added as a separate state charge running parallel to the federal case. He didn't look at her as they led him past the gallery. He didn't look at anyone. Whatever remained of the man who'd once commanded an empire across North America had been replaced by someone smaller, grayer, a man whose entire identity had been built on power and control, and who now possessed neither. Salvatore Greco's faction moved quickly to consolidate leadership within the organization in the aftermath, a transition Vivian followed only peripherally through news reports and occasional updates from Agent Reyes, who'd become something between a federal contact and an unlikely friend over the months of preparation for trial. She didn't particularly care who replaced Alessandro at the head of his empire. She'd stopped thinking of that world as anything that belonged to her the moment she'd watched him confess, in open court, that her money had mattered more to him than her life. 6 months after the courthouse hearing, Vivian sat in Evelyn's office for her follow-up scan results. The particular anxious stillness of waiting rooms, a feeling she'd come to know intimately over the past year. Evelyn herself delivered the news this time. No other doctor, no formal clinical distance. Just her sister sitting across the desk with a folder and an expression that told Vivian everything before a single word was spoken. "Clean," Evelyn said. "Completely clean, Viv. No evidence of recurrence anywhere. Your blood work is excellent. Whatever else this year took from you, your body won the fight it actually needed to win." Vivian sat with that for a long moment, feeling the words settle into her chest slowly, the way good news sometimes took longer to absorb than bad news ever did, like her body had forgotten how to process anything except bracing for the next blow. "I'm cancer-free," she said, testing the words out loud, like she needed to hear herself say them to believe them. "You're cancer-free." Evelyn reached across the desk and took her hand, surgeon's grip firm and certain. "You did this, Viv. Not the surgery alone, not the chemo alone. You did this by refusing to let any of it, the diagnosis, the divorce, the danger, turn you into someone who gave up. I've watched a lot of patients fight this disease. I've never watched anyone fight it quite like you did, with everything else falling apart around you at the same time." Vivian thought about the woman she'd been 13 months ago, walking out of a different hospital with a diagnosis in one hand and her entire identity wrapped up in being Alessandro De Luca's wife, believing that marriage was the foundation everything else in her life rested on. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone she remembered with a kind of distant tenderness, the way you might remember a younger sibling who hadn't yet learned what she was actually capable of surviving. The Ashcroft Foundation opened its doors 8 months after the courthouse hearing, occupying a renovated building in River North that Vivian had purchased outright with a portion of Margaret's trust funds, the rest committed to an endowment designed to operate the foundation indefinitely without depending on ongoing fundraising. The mission statement, which Vivian had written herself over several long nights with Helena, reviewing every draft for legal precision,
was simple and direct: legal protection, financial assistance, housing support, transportation, and emotional resources for women abandoned during serious illness or facing domestic betrayal. Serena Moreau was one of the Foundation's first clients, though by the time the doors officially opened, she'd already given birth to a daughter, a small, fierce girl with her mother's dark eyes who Serena had named Margaret, a choice that had made Vivian cry the first time she heard it, sitting in a hospital room very different from the ones that had defined the previous year of her life. "You didn't have to," Serena had said, watching Vivian's reaction carefully, still uncertain of her footing in this strange, unlikely friendship that had formed in the wreckage of a shared betrayal. "Name her after your aunt. I know it might feel strange, given everything." It's not strange. Vivian had held the baby for the first time that afternoon, feeling the particular weight of new life in her arms, a feeling that carried none of the complicated grief she might have expected, only something clean and hopeful. Margaret spent her whole life building something that protected people who didn't even know they needed protecting. I think she'd be glad to know her name carries forward in someone who's going to grow up safe, instead of disappearing into the kind of silence that swallowed so much of our family's history. Serena had used the Foundation's legal services to finalize custody and child support arrangements that didn't depend on Alessandro's cooperation, given his incarceration status, and had taken a position on the Foundation's outreach team 6 months later, her own experience giving her a particular credibility with new clients that no amount of formal training could have replicated. She and Vivian weren't quite friends, not in any conventional sense, the history between them too complicated and too painful for easy categorization. But they'd built something functional and even occasionally warm, two women who'd survived the same man's cruelty and chosen, deliberately, not to let that survival curdle into permanent bitterness toward each other. The call came on a rainy evening in late autumn, 14 months after the parking garage. While Vivian was sitting in her new apartment, not the Lincoln Park mansion sold months ago, but a smaller place in Lakeview with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a city she was slowly learning to see as entirely her own again, reviewing grant applications for the Foundation's Housing Assistance Program. The number was unfamiliar, but something in her gut recognized it before she even answered, some old instinct from a marriage that had trained her to read danger in unexpected phone calls. "Vivian." Alessandro's voice, when it came through the line, sounded nothing like the man who'd once commanded rooms with a single look. Thinner, older, stripped of every layer of polish that had once made him formidable. "I didn't think you'd answer." "I almost didn't." She kept her voice steady, watching rain trace patterns down the window glass, feeling something strange and almost clinical in her own calm, like she was observing the conversation from a slight distance rather than fully inhabiting it. "You're allowed phone calls now?" "Limited ones. Monitored, obviously, but limited ones." A pause. The particular silence of a man choosing his next words with unusual care. "I wanted to call before the sentencing hearing next week. I wanted to say some things while I still had the chance." "You don't owe me an apology, Alessandro. I stopped needing one a long time ago." "I know." His voice cracked slightly on those two words. "I know I don't deserve to ask this, but I'm asking anyway, because I don't have much left except honesty at this point. And God help me, I learned that lesson too late to matter. Is there any version of this where you might consider eventually some kind of no?" She said it gently, but with a finality that left no room for negotiation, no door cracked open even slightly. "There's no version of this, Alessandro. Not eventually, not someday. Not after you've served whatever time the court decides you deserve. I want you to understand something, and I want you to really hear it, because I think you've spent your entire life believing strength looks like power, like control, like being the person everyone else is afraid of." She paused, watching rain blur the city lights beyond her window into soft halos of gold and white. "Cancer didn't destroy my life," she continued. "I want you to understand that clearly. I lost a breast. I lost 6 months to surgery and recovery and chemotherapy that made me sicker before it made me better. But cancer didn't destroy anything that mattered, because cancer doesn't have opinions about whether I'm worth loving. You did that. You looked at a woman who'd just learned she might die, and you calculated in real time whether she was still a good investment. That's not weakness, Alessandro. That's not even really about fear, the way you tried to convince yourself and everyone else. That's just who you are. Underneath the suits and the power and the empire you spent your whole life building. You revealed it yourself in that courtroom, in front of cameras and reporters and a judge who saw exactly what the rest of us had already figured out. Silence on the line, heavy with everything neither of them could undo. Your betrayal didn't break me, she finished. It just showed me who actually deserved a place in my life going forward. And I'm grateful for that, in a strange way I never expected to feel. I'm grateful you showed me exactly who you were, instead of letting me keep believing in someone who never really existed. Vivian, goodbye, Alessandro. I hope you find whatever peace is possible for you, wherever you end up, but I won't be part of finding it. She ended the call before he could respond, setting the phone face down on the windowsill with hands that, she noticed with something like quiet pride, weren't shaking at all. What? The rain continued through the evening, steady and unhurried, and Vivian sat for a long while simply watching it, feeling the particular stillness that settles into a person after they finally set down a weight they'd been carrying so long they'd forgotten what it felt like to stand without it. Across town, in a federal facility awaiting his sentencing hearing, Alessandro De Luca sat alone in a small gray room, staring at a phone that had gone dark and silent, finally understanding something it had taken an entire empire's collapse to teach him. That he hadn't lost his wife because illness made her weak, the way he'd told himself in that parking garage so many months ago, certain in his cruelty, confident in his cold arithmetic. He'd lost her because somewhere beneath all his power, all his control, all the fear other men carried just hearing his name, he had been the weakest person in the marriage all along. A man who mistook control for strength and discovered, far too late, that real strength looked nothing like what he'd spent his whole life building. Vivian, in her apartment with its wide windows and its view of a city she'd reclaimed inch by inch, didn't think about him again that night. She thought instead about tomorrow's foundation meeting, about a new client intake scheduled for 9 in the morning, a woman whose husband had abandoned her 3 weeks into a leukemia diagnosis, leaving her with 2 children and no resources and a fear that nobody would believe her story was real. Vivian believed her. Vivian believed every woman who walked through the foundation's doors, because she understood now, in a way she never could have before her own diagnosis, before the parking garage, before everything that followed, that survival wasn't about avoiding the worst things that could happen to you. It was about what you built afterward, in the wreckage, with whatever pieces remained. Her scars, faint now beneath her shirt, no longer felt like evidence of loss. They felt like proof of something else entirely, something she carried forward into every conversation with every frightened woman who walked through her foundation's doors, looking for the kind of strength Vivian had once doubted she possessed. Real strength, she understood now, had never belonged to men like Alessandro, men who confused fear with respect and control with love. It belonged to the people who survived being discarded, who rebuilt themselves from whatever remained, who turned their worst chapter into someone else's first chance at safety. The rain outside finally slowed to a gentle patter against the glass, and Vivian closed her laptop, the grant applications finished for the night, and allowed herself, for the first time in over a year, the simple and entirely unguarded pleasure of feeling completely, irrevocably at peace.